Hey there, I am back with another deck review, and today I'm going to be looking at the Swordswomen playing cards from Ravenswood Academy. Ravenswood is a school out in Texas founded by Alexander Petty, and they follow kind of a variety of different disciplines in their coursework. So they do things like, arts and music, but also playing cards and flourishes. But their real passion seems to be in martial arts and swordplay. So it was that passion that really inspired the creation of this deck right here, in following the swordswomen, famous swordswomen throughout history and across cultures. So a really interesting inspiration behind the deck, but let's find out how they did and take a closer look. Now, starting with the front of the tuck case, it's a white matte tuck, and it's covered in this really beautifully embossed design. Interestingly, it's done in landscape rather than the classic portrait. There's a little bit of a different twist on it, but you've got this design that just says beauty meets strength, and then the swordswoman written across in a very kind of Victorian inspired design or font there, and then playing cards, and then the RA for Ravenswood Academy down there at the bottom, all done in these kind of navy blue sort of colors on here. And then the background design is done mostly in gold and features a very French inspired looking set of flourishes going all the way around. All these little kind of swirls going all the way through. But then you also have the flowers and the grass coming through at the bottom. And then fairly prominently, you have a sword crossing diagonally all the way across the front of the tuck case there. Obviously, swordswomen, you've got the sword there. There are little touches in here and slight accents of this kind of really pale, almost a mint green looking color as well. Just give it a little bit more depth in color. And then the whole front is very, very slightly embossed. I don't know how well that shows up, but there's a very slight embossing on here just to give it a little bit of a feel to it. So nice front to the tuck. I think the landscape orientation in particular is a really interesting choice. On the sides of it, you got the Ravenswood Academy on one side, long sword on the other. On the bottom, you have your ad copy for Hansen Chan Production Company, who printed the deck. And on the top, it just says "On Guard," partially covered by that tuck seal, but "On Guard" just in fencing, like what the fencers would say as they prepare for a clash. And then on the back, this is not the back design of the cards, but it features this really fancy, thick border, similar aesthetic we looked at the front with all those kind of French-looking flourishes. And then in the middle, you've got a quote from Chu Jin, who was a famous revolutionary in China. She fought for women's rights before she was ultimately executed for her efforts there. But a great quote from her, which comes from one of the poems that she wrote, and says, "Don't tell me women are not the stuff of heroes." You can see the inspiration that they're going for and kind of celebrating the strength of women throughout this deck. You do get a custom tuck seal, and it's just a kind of brown and blue, I guess. Very reminiscent, I guess, of the tax stamp seals that you see on older bicycle decks. Looks very similar to me, but it just has the Ravenswood Academy logo on it. As you open it up, nothing printed on the inside or on those inner flaps. So that's the tuck case. Interesting, nice design. It's very bold on the design, so I like it. I like the landscape design. Not a bad tuck. But let's take a look at the cards, and we'll start with the back. This was, for me, when they launched their Kickstarter campaign, the first thing that drew me to it was the image of this back design. I think it's really beautifully done. It's a good mixture of vintage styling on this one, but also with kind of a more modern bit of artwork. This was completely designed from the ground up. And is just a beautiful design celebrating swords, both swords and women, obviously the two inspirations in the deck. The very center here is a large flower kind of blooming out of the center, and then you've got just an explosion of design elements all the way around. Obviously, the most prominent features are going to be the face of a woman right there at the top with kind of a pensive look on her face, and then the two swords kind of drawing in from the corners, repeated on the other side. You've got both a Western sword and an Eastern inspired sword, showing how this is kind of cross cultures. You have more flourishes and details all the way through, but as I zoom in, you can kind of see just how much detail went into this design. Kind of has an engraving sort of look to it with those hash marks forming the shading. I think it's a really beautifully done design, fully two-way on the back, and then has this kind of thin white poker border around the edge. I love the blues that they use, and this is a very bright, vibrant blue. And like I said, it's kind of a vintage feel to it, which I think in general they were going for something that kind of felt a little bit like an older deck, at least in terms of the back designs. And then that Victorian font on the front kind of had that feel, I guess, if you will, was kind of evoking an earlier era. So there is the back design of the cards. Let's look at the extra card you get next. So here's your Joker. It's a diptych Joker, just meaning two cards that you can put together into a single image. You'll see they're labeled number 1 and number 2 at the bottom. And they come together to form this beautiful picture inspired by 150-year-old woodblock printing of two women practicing kendo. So you can see their crossed wooden swords there in the center, and then the two women, one on either card with the RA in the center. A really beautiful, highly detailed design. And yeah, like I said, this is inspired by or kind of drawn from a recolored version of an old woodblock painting. Which kind of gets to a lot of the inspirations we're going to see through the rest of this deck. They draw on a lot of different art sources in putting together all of these images, which I think was kind of cool, the level of research that went into this one. So there's your two Jokers. You also get a couple of extra cards here. The first one is just going to be a thank you card. Mentions that a portion of the proceeds for this are going to go to a local women's shelter. Have that heart pip there at the bottom. And then on the back is just a dedication card, along with a picture of an American fencer there in the center, one of the more renowned American fencers, kind of a sepia colored picture over there. So there is your extra card, your first one. And then your second one, on one side is going to feature a little bit of information about the Ravenswood Academy, along with this engraving picture over here of a hand grasping a sword. So there's that. And then as you flip it over, you get a roll card kind of mentioning who all the different characters on all the suits are going to be. And we'll show a little bit of that as we get through it, but you can see some of the characters that are going to be featured throughout the deck. We'll talk about those as we get to them. All right, now the deck itself, and we'll start with the Ace of Spades. Really beautiful design, kind of an engraving style of the three crossed swords, a couple like a rapier, I think this is an épée over here, and then the long sword really prominent across the back. It has RA in the corner for Ravenswood Academy, and just says very simply, Swordswomen playing cards, limited edition, 1 of 1,000. So just 1,000 of these printed, and it's not going to be reprinted at all. So a fairly limited deck. You do have full custom pips and indices in the corner. This very broad font over here, very similar to what they used for the RA in their logo. And then you have a completely redrawn spade pip. All the pips on this one come from a series of paintings they commissioned. They basically just commissioned a painting of a single spade, club, diamond, and heart, and then use those paintings as the pips in this one. So that spade pip, you get this very fat, rounded look to it. As you go through the numbers, you get a better look at some of those spade pips, but otherwise it's a pretty classic orientation on these. And then you get to what is the real highlight of this deck, and that is the court cards. So the court cards are each going to feature a famous swordswoman from some culture across the country. So I'll put these down and look at these three real quick. And I'll just go through really briefly on these and talk about who they are. So the Jack of Spades is not a particular person, but is a look at what's called the Dahomey Amazons. So these were African warriors who fought against some of the European colonizers. So this is a celebration of those warriors. They were renowned for their ferocity and their sword work, and so we wanted to celebrate those. And you can see just how beautifully detailed that painting is. Each of these is a commissioned painting, and they went into meticulous detail in looking at source material to kind of draw on and make these, I don't want to say as accurate as possible. In some cases, they're exact recreations of like a famous photograph. In others, like this one, they're kind of an amalgamation of different information, you know, as to the type of armor they would wear, or like these bracelets over here, the types of swords they might carry, etc. A really beautifully drawn design. And as you go into this, there's just so many little touches, like the shell necklace, or the shells that were used to put together the armor, even those little kind of star designs on here, just really beautifully drawn up. So there's the Jack of Spades. Next one is going to be the Queen of Spades. So this is Laxmi Bai. And Laxmi Bai was an Indian queen and also a swordswoman herself of renown. She used a sword and a shield. And again, just a really striking, beautiful, highly detailed design on this one all the way through. Just even, the wisps of hair going on in the back, a really striking look to it. Really beautiful. Love the colors that are used in this and love how distinct each one of these designs is. Now, I will say it's a completely one-way court card design with the queen, the pip and index only in one of the two corners. You're not going to find it in this other corner, meaning if you're using these for gameplay, you kind of have to use these cards with the correct orientation. A little bit annoying. We'll talk a little bit more about what I think about the deck overall in a little bit. And then the King of Spades. This is one of my favorite designs, probably. This is a samurai warrior, one of the many female samurai warriors that were out there. This is Tomoe Gozen. And again, you can see just very beautiful detail on this one. This is actually an amalgamation of an actual piece of armor that they found, along with pictures of Tomoe herself. And so it's kind of putting together armor that might have been typical of the era, but not necessarily exactly the armor she was wearing. And I love the level of detail on this one. You can see the cherry blossoms there on her arm guard, the dragon design on the chest plate as well, but is really beautifully drawn on this one. So there's the King of Spades. Now we go into the diamonds, and you can see a little bit more of that painting. The red cards are interesting because you get a little bit of almost a marbling effect in there because of how these were painted. So you can really see the individual designs of the pips. So there are the diamond pips going all the way through. And then we get to the 3 diamond courts. Now, all 3 of these are going to be inspired by Chinese swordswomen. The first one is going to be on the Jack of Diamonds, is a World War II era design from someone named Tam Tai Men. She was one of the female warriors who fought in China during World War II, and they use these kind of long-handled swords here that you see. This is actually a recreation of a famous photograph that was pictured to celebrate some of those female warriors there. So I love that look of determination on her face, and you can see definitely the more modern clothing that she's wearing as well. There's Tam Tai Men. Next up, this is the only one that's a purely fictional character. This is Mulan. And yes, that Mulan from that movie. So Mulan from the Disney movie kind of served as the inspiration for this one. She was famous for posing as a man so that she could enter the army and fight with the other men. And so you can see her featured here. Now it's featuring her in more traditional female garb, but you can see her holding her sword. So a little bit of a fictionally inspired character from Disney, but still a really beautifully done design with the flower petals going out from her hair, and then just the beautiful design. I mean, you can even see like the jade work on this decoration hanging off of her pommel, even just tons of detail done in this one. So I really like that Queen of Diamonds. And then the King of Diamonds, we go back to actual characters from history. This is Hong Shunjiao. She, along with her brother, led a very bloody revolution in China back around the turn of the century. So she led a regiment of hundreds of women soldiers in this kind of uprising or rebellion. Her brother claimed to be the brother of Christ or the descendant of Christ. I'm not sure exactly what the story was, but they had a large group of followers and then led this overall rebellion before ultimately being put down in China. As you see her there, she was known for using double swords. So you've got the cross swords there. This doesn't come from an actual photo of her, but is recreated with details from a variety of different accounts. I love the oranges that were used on this, the double cross swords, just the motion that goes into that pose. I think it's really beautiful. So there is the King of Diamonds. Now going into the clubs, and we're going to go to a little bit more Western style designs here. And we'll start with the King of Clubs here. This is Joan of Arc. The only one of the swordswomen who is not featured holding a sword, although she was very well known as, for her prowess with the sword. She did have kind of this boyish, short cropped hairstyle that you see here in most of the images that are associated with her. And she was also very pious. She was one of the martyrs of the early church. So you'll see the cross in her hands as she's holding the rosary there and kind of looking on in prayer. Now the armor here is actually, according to them, a little bit more of a modern armor. So they took a little bit of an artistic liberty there. This would actually be armor that you would see maybe 100 to 200 years after Joan of Arc's time. So a little bit of an artistic liberty taken there, but it's really beautifully drawn armor with those individual interlocking plates all the way through. So there's a look at Joan of Arc. Queen of Clubs. This is what's called Walpurgis. It's not exactly known if this was an exact character from history, but what this one comes from is there's a fencing guide that was done hundreds of years ago, and they have images in there to kind of help people with different poses throughout. And on a few of those images, there's an image of a female fighter, and she's kind of in this pose. So this is the guide became known as the Walpurgis Guide or the Walpurgis Fencing Guide, and they kind of named this character Walpurgis. So she was seen in there fighting against other male swordsmen in kind of these poses as part of teaching swordplay throughout. And so you've got her here holding the small buckler and the longer sword there. They're really beautiful. And if you see some of the original artwork, just Google Walpurgis. You can see how it's spelled right there. And you can find really quickly some of that artwork as well that really inspired this right here. And then you have the Jack of Clubs, and this is not a particular person again. This is a gladiatrix. These were just sort of acknowledgement of some of the female gladiators that fought in the Roman Colosseum. It's known that a number of them did, and so this is just a look at one of those. Much like their male counterparts, they actually fought without shirts. So you'll see kind of behind the shield, she's actually shirtless, and you can see all kinds of detail, even the slashes and scars on her body from the battles that she's fought. A really beautiful look on that one. Now, running real quick through the clubs, there are your club pips. I love that kind of rounded design on these. And then we get to the heart courts, the last three of the courts. So the King of Hearts is, I'm going to probably butcher this pronunciation, but it's Julie d'Aubigny. Don't know. That's the name I'm trying to say, Julie d'Aubigny. And she was an opera singer and just also well known for a lot of her exploits with the sword, including duels, etc. More of a Victorian era character, as you can see from the fan and the hairstyle, the dress that she's wearing, but really striking pose that she's in. This is inspired by actual poses from her work on the stage as well. But really love this one. But she was actually very renowned for her work with the sword in a variety of duels. So a very interesting life that she had. And then here we come to one of the more accomplished fencers of the world. This right here is Ilona Eli. She was a Jewish fencer who battled in a number of different Olympics, achieved Olympic gold a couple of times, has tons of world championships as well to her name. She's one of the most decorated female fencers of all time, if not the most decorated female fencer of all time. And actually, she fenced as a Jewish swordswoman. She fenced at the 1938 Olympics in Berlin. That's where Jesse Owens was famous for standing up to Hitler, if you will. She, in her own small way, did the same thing in coming into Germany as a Jew and winning the gold in front of Hitler and his entourage. So very cool. This is her kind of in the later stages of her life. She fenced well into her 40s. And you see that beautiful look kind of holding the helmet there and with the épée in her hand. This comes from an actual photograph. And then you have, last but not least, the Jack of Hearts. This is Esa Behrringer. She was an actress and acclaimed swordswoman herself, and you can see her in this beautiful, victorious pose here. Like I said, mostly known for her work on the stage, but she did practice swordplay quite a bit in her work. So there is Esa Behrringer. And then we go through the hearts really quickly, and you can see again that kind of hand-painted style on the hearts as we go through those. So that's the deck. If you're interested in finding out more about these stories, I'll put a link down to a video that Alexander Petty put together. He goes into more detail on some of these characters. It shows some of the source artwork. I think it's a fantastic resource if you want to find out more about these cards. But as far as the handling of the cards, this is a really nicely done deck. This isn't the USPCC or Cardamundi that a lot of people are used to, but Hansen Chan deck does handle really, really nicely. The finish on here is quite nice. It's definitely a little bit thicker of a stock, but it still has some nice snap to it. It's gonna fan and cut really beautifully. The deck overall, I'm conflicted in thinking about this deck. I like so much of the artwork. I like the design of the tuck case. I love the design of the backs. I think that the portraits that they put throughout this are absolutely stunning. But I'm conflicted when thinking about this as a deck of cards. What I mean by that is a few different things. So first of all, it's a little bit disjointed to me. I think, the back design, the portrait design, and the tuck case don't necessarily match. I know they're trying to go for inspirations across different styles. When we have the very Asian looks with the more Victorian inspired looks, it kind of gets a little bit of dissonance on it. That said, I think it's really beautiful artwork. The other thing I will say is it's not a terribly functional deck for a few reasons. First off, and I mentioned this during the review, the one-way court designs and not having that index in the other corner means that really you can only use these courts in a single orientation. It's going to limit its use for magic or gameplay for sure. Those high detail colors even are going to really limit how you can use this in some cases in cardistry, just because you're going to get that really vibrant flash of color that's kind of going to distract you from what's going on. And the other thing I will say is because these are full bleed back designs, or face designs, meaning the design goes all the way to the edge on the court cards, it means that you get a little bit of bleed. And you'll see what I mean over here. As I turn this to the side, you can see the edges of that design as you hold the deck this way. So you can really clearly see where the courts are. See that line of orange right there? If I split it right there, you'll find, there it is. It's the King of Diamonds. So that King of Diamonds, you can really clearly see where that is in the deck. Definitely limits down some of the usefulness and means that this is really going to be more of an artwork deck. That said, as an artwork deck, there is a ton to unpack. I mean, I'm 22 minutes into this video because there's a lot to look at in this deck. So I still have a lot of appreciation for what was done with this deck. I think they did a great job with the design. That said, just know what you're getting into. So it really just kind of depends on what you're looking for in a deck. So that's it. That's the Swordswomen playing cards. Hope you enjoyed. Let me know what other decks you want to see. Subscribe for more deck reviews and unboxings. And I'll see you for the next one.